Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of COS Live. I'm Rita Peters. I'm the Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs with Convention of States Action. And we're coming to you now because in just a few moments, we're expecting a hearing in a three-person subcommittee of the Iowa House Committee on State Government. This is, of course, in consideration of our Article 5 Convention of States application, which you'll hear referred to in Iowa as HJR 6 on the House side. And actually, we were informed late yesterday that they're going to do two hearings. So we're expecting the hearing on our Article 5 application, HJR 6, to start at the top of the hour. But late yesterday, the language for our 34 Ready legislation in Iowa got finalized, and our sponsor of that legislation, who is on this three-person subcommittee, really wanted it to be heard right before the main Article 5 application. So Representative Megan Jones, the sponsor of that legislation, will be introducing it. We expect that to happen in about 5 minutes, so quarter to the top of the hour. We expect the three-person subcommittee in Iowa to hear our 34 Ready legislation just before the subcommittee hears our Article 5 application. Now, 19 states have already passed our Article 5 application for a convention to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution on three topics: fiscal restraints, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and setting term limits for federal officials and members of Congress. We need 34 states to pass this resolution to get to convention. So that means we have just 15 states to go to call the first ever Article 5 convention to permanently reign in D.C., using the Constitution to restore the Republic. It's that simple. Article 5 is the solution as big as the problem. Currently, 8 All right. Hopefully, I have audio back now. And just to remind you, last year we had successful votes in committee in Iowa, but we're never scheduled for a floor vote. So the Iowa team is looking to make a difference this year and get farther than they've ever had, push their state across the finish line for COS. Could they be state number 20 this year to pass the Convention of States application? We did have a victory, as I said, in the Senate State Government Subcommittee. We're still pending consideration by that full committee on the Senate side. Today, we're in the House State Government Subcommittee. Now, this is the public's only opportunity in Iowa to show up and make their voices heard. They don't get to go and testify before the full committee. They have to give their testimony before this three-person subcommittee. When the resolutions then move to the full committee, that's when the committee members deliberate among themselves and decide whether to vote to forward it to the full Senate or the full House, respectively. So, if the vote in this three-person subcommittee is successful today, our resolution still needs to work its way through the full committee on the House side of the Iowa legislature. Now, I hope you can stay tuned after the hearing because we are hoping to get a recap and on the ground reaction from Assistant Regional Director Karen Schuster, who is an Iowa native and has been really leading this effort for Convention of States in Iowa for years now. So it'll be neat to get her on the ground reaction. I believe she is on the ground there for this subcommittee today. So it'll be neat to see what the Iowa team brings out for us. And if you're just joining us, we are waiting for this three-person Iowa House subcommittee to start. They're going to first consider our 34 Ready legislation in Iowa, which was just finalized late yesterday and kind of sneaked in at the last moment to this hearing this morning. Then at the top of the hour, approximately, or right after the 34 Ready hearing is over, we expect the same subcommittee to consider our Article 5 application, which on the House side in Iowa is HJR 6. So we're looking forward to that. While we wait for them to get started, I want to say a few brief words about what happened in Idaho last night. It was so exciting. I have to say, it was probably the most exciting and the most confusing committee hearing I have ever seen. And I've watched a lot of committee hearings. They ended up, after 3 hours of public testimony, 3 hours of public testimony, they ended up voting on three separate motions. There was a motion to just keep the resolution in the committee. That motion failed. Then there was a motion to hold the resolution until February 21st, which probably wouldn't have been a good thing for us. That motion was also killed. Then the chair of the committee said he needed to take a break to consult Mason's rules, and he turned off the video feed for the committee. So some people thought the hearing was actually over when in fact he was just taking a break. A few minutes later, he came back and the committee voted on the third and final motion, which was the do pass motion that we needed to get through committee. And what was interesting was just a few moments before the vote was taken, one of the committee members whom we needed to be a yes vote said he was going to be a no vote. And then a couple of really good points were made by some of our champions on that committee, like Representative Joe Alfieri, Representative Ted Hill, Representative Schertz, made some really good points in their remarks. And by the time the vote was taken on that final do pass motion, we won by a vote of 8-7. So barely squeaked by. I'm going to be honest, I had kind of given up hope before that final vote was taken. I thought we had lost the committee member we needed to secure passage there. What's interesting is that in those final moments, I was texting with Mark Meckler and letting him know, what was going on. It looks like one of our yes votes has flipped and we're probably not going to make it through. Mark said, I need to step away and go somewhere quiet and pray. And that is what he did. And sure enough, just a few minutes later, we passed that Idaho committee by a vote of 8-7. Now, we're not sure yet when the floor vote will be, but we definitely have some work to do to get the votes we need to pass in the Idaho House. That would be first ever for us. It would be unprecedented. So please be praying, and if you're in Idaho, reach out to your legislator, get plugged in with our grassroots team there. If you're watching and you're new to Convention of States, go to cosaction.com/take action and see what you can do to get involved, because this effort really requires all of us to be showing up, standing up, speaking up, reaching out to our legislators and letting them know that we want them to use the Constitution's solution to bring permanent structural reform and additional limitations to the power of the federal government in Washington, D.C. So, again, if you're just joining us, we are waiting for this 3-person Iowa subcommittee to get together. Karen Schuster, our assistant regional director on the ground there, texted me a few minutes ago and said, yes, they are supposed to start at 1:45, the top of the hour, but no one's here yet. So they might just be running a little bit late there, but we do expect them to start any minute now. And, I'm really excited to hear, in particular, this subcommittee hearing on the 34 Ready piece of legislation in Iowa. If you're new to Convention of States, and you hear me saying 34 Ready, and you're thinking, what is that? Well, that is just the package of legislation that is really procedural in nature, and basically it gets the state prepared procedurally for the first ever Article 5 convention. It sets forth how that state legislature will choose its commissioners to the Article 5 convention, what the qualifications are to be a commissioner, and then really how the state legislature will oversee and govern those commissioners while they're at the convention. And then finally, and importantly, it sets forth penalties for any commissioner who might go astray from their instructions or try to violate the scope of their authority to act in representation of that state legislature. So this is really important procedural legislation, and I can tell you that in Iowa, this piece was really important foundational kind of groundwork for some of the legislators, including the sponsor of this piece, Representative Megan Jones, really wanted those procedural details to be in place before she would support the Article 5 application itself. And since she has authored this 34 Ready legislation, she has become a great champion and co-sponsor of the Convention of States Article 5 application itself. So it really has been helpful in Iowa to move forward with this 34 Ready piece. And in Iowa, she really wanted this 34 Ready legislation to be very detailed. In fact, it's a lot longer than the legislation that we see introduced in most of the states. It added a bunch of definitions and preambles setting forth the history of Article 5 and the many reasons we know that the state legislatures do, in fact, select and control the commissioners. The commissioners to the Article 5 convention don't just go and do whatever they want at convention. No, they represent the state legislatures. The Article 5 convention is a creature of the state legislatures. It is controlled by them. The agenda is limited by the state legislatures and what they put in the 34 applications that trigger the convention in the first place. So, this 34 ready piece, I think, is going to be very helpful in Iowa, and I'm looking forward to seeing Representative Jones introduce it. They do appear to be running considerably late since our hearing on the application itself was supposed to start at the top of the hour. Looks like we're going to go a little bit longer than what we had intended, but that's all right because this is all good material. Love to see these legislators being educated about Article 5 and the Article 5 process. And I particularly love seeing our grassroots come out to support this legislation. It was really inspiring in Idaho last night. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, it was a 3 hour long public hearing with testimony on our Article 5 application and a 34 ready resolution. And our grassroots did an incredible job, as they always do. They were professional, they respected the time limits, they were informative, they did not repeat each other. Each of them talked about a slightly different aspect of Article 5 and our application. They were respectful to the committee members. On the other hand, we saw opponents, many of whom were from out of state, and they frequently would just run way past the time limit. The committee chair would have to interrupt them and sometimes repeatedly ask them to stop. They were not willing to respect the time limits. Some of them were disrespectful to the committee members. So we generally do see a marked contrast in both the attitude of those who testify and also the value of their testimony, how informative it is, how it stays on topic, stays on point, and how respectful they are to the legislators. One of the committee members last night in that Idaho committee hearing also mentioned that he had received, I believe the word he used was hundreds of emails on the issue. And we're proud of that. We had lots of Idaho residents contacting those committee members, letting them know that the people of Idaho are ready for those state legislators to use their constitutional authority under Article 5 and apply for the first ever Convention of States. And again, our application would call for a convention to propose constitutional amendments on just 3 topics: imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and setting term limits for federal officials and for members of Congress. Again, 19 states have already passed an application for a convention on those very same 3 topics. So whichever state passes next will become number 20. And again, it takes 34 states to actually trigger the first Article 5 convention. Producer G has put that beautiful graphic up again showing in green all of the states that have already passed our application for a convention. In blue, the states where we have active legislation pending this year. And in yellow, Wyoming and South Dakota have both this year passed our Article 5 application on the Senate side. Now, sadly, in South Dakota, we did go on to experience a defeat on the House side, but in Wyoming, we are still pending. In fact, we were just this week, I think, maybe last week, assigned to committee on the House side in Wyoming. So right now in Wyoming, we are waiting to have our committee hearing date scheduled in the House Education Committee in Wyoming. And you might say, Well, why would we be in an education committee? Well, it's because our Article 5 application does include in its topics amendments that would limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. That does mean that we could limit the federal government's jurisdiction over education and take it away completely. Okay, looks like the subcommittee here in Iowa is about to get started. Let's go to audio there, producer
Please
G.
don't repeat what somebody else has already said. We had that earlier. It was great. If you agree with someone, you can just state that you agree or disagree. And then we will open it up for any comments from my committee members and move on from there. So with that, I will allow Karen, you can go ahead, sir.
I'm Karen Schuster from Ankeny, Iowa, and I am testifying on my own behalf and on behalf of Convention of States Action in support of HJR 6. Congress has had the power to propose amendments that would rein in the federal government. It hasn't, and it won't. This is a problem the framers foresaw, and the very reason they gave us a second method to propose amendments. 88% of Americans support term limits. 71% want more limitations on federal power. 68% are in favor of a resolution like HJR 6, which calls for a meeting of the states to propose amendments establishing term limits, spending limits, and jurisdiction limits on the federal government. Furthermore, 59% said that they trust you, their state legislators, more than their representatives in Congress. Most important to the legislators in this state house, over 56,000 Iowans have signed a petition asking you to exercise your power to protect us from the encroachment of the federal government into our daily lives. Much of the problem has been caused by U.S. Supreme Court decisions, which have expanded the power of the federal government, especially concerning the Commerce Clause and the General Welfare Clause. Our republic has historically fixed bad Supreme Court decisions with amendments. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments fixed the bad decision of the Supreme Court in the Dred Scott case. And the 19th Amendment fixed the bad decision saying that women did not have the right to vote. Today, you'll likely hear the usual 3 R's of our opposition: the runaway, the rules, and the rewrite. They will say that the 1787 convention was a runaway. Therefore, a convention to propose amendments under Article 5 today will also be a runaway. Not only is this a logical fallacy called hasty generalization, but the question of the 1787 convention exceeding its power was asked and answered in the negative by Federalist 40. Our opponents will say that Article 5 is too vague. There are no rules for the convention. But just like this Iowa General Assembly did a few weeks ago, an Article 5 convention would review the rules of previous state conventions, amend, and adopt them. Our opponents will say that we're trying to rewrite the Constitution, but where they previously said that Article 5 was too vague, they now overlook that it very specifically says a convention to propose amendments. This is not a con, but a 5-con, and all it can do is propose amendments. And then those amendments have to be ratified by 38 states, where just one chamber in 13 states can stop any amendment. They don't have to vote no, they just don't vote on it at all, and the amendment is dead. An Article 5 amending convention was given to us by the framers to rein in a runaway federal government. It's safe and it's time to use it. This resolution has already been passed in 19 other states, and I'm asking you on behalf of over 56,000 Iowans who signed the petition, please vote yes on HJR 6.
Yes, good morning. My name is John Gruber from Altoona, and I have a quick little handout for you guys. There you go. I don't know who's all, I got plenty. Okay. What I got here is a mock-up of a check. We all know that for the U.S. citizens and grandchildren of the United States right now, $38 trillion. A lot of people, the number rolls off their lips very easily. But when you actually see it written out with all the zeros, that is one big whopping number. What are we going to do about it? Okay. And the thing is, the framers had divine intervention when they built the Constitution, built 7 articles, 10 original amendments. you read the 5th article completely, you see there's 2 ways to amend the Constitution. Then the second way is what I need your help with. That's what we're doing here today. That we can as states get together and they can ratify new amendments to balance the budget, try to get this under control. If we actually put up guardrails that they would have to live within, we saw in the last few weeks that there's all kinds of spending that you're like, well, that sounds kind of silly. But maybe we can get rid of the silly and maybe there's enough room there. We can become like an Iowa budget and we can have it balanced. Okay, I'll let you read this over at your free time because I don't want to take your time here. If you have any other questions, by all means, you can contact me. But that's all the time I'm going to take for your time today. Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Good morning, ladies. Good afternoon. My name's Nathan Hayes. I'm with a group called Article 5 Iowa. We're here to advocate for the passing of HJR 6. I live here in Des Moines. Talk a little bit about insanity this morning. Common definition of insanity we received from Miss Brown back in 1983 from her book Sudden Death. Definition of insanity: do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. People who oppose using Article 5 will tell you, we'll just vote for better people. We'll do the vote thing. We'll vote in good people. Since World War II, at the federal level, incumbents win their elections 95% of the time. Since 1982, when the federal deficit passed $1 trillion, took 170 years to break the $1 trillion mark. Currently today, we're passing $1 trillion into the deficit every 100 days. Insanity. They'll tell you don't do anything about it. Just keep voting for better people. Insanity. Historically, any nation or empire whose debt to GDP ratio surpasses about 75%, that nation or empire historically falls every time. For the last 4 years, our debt to GDP has been about 130%. The weight of the federal government will crush this country. The republic I received from my parents and my grandparents is not as good as the republic I'm passing on to my children and my grandchildren. Insanity. Right now, President Trump and his efforts to fix the government and reduce spending are all done by the power of the pen. Everything he does can be simply undone in the next 4 years. If you expect him to be the savior of our nation, he cannot be the savior of the country. We need state legislatures to stand up, to use their power, and stop the insanity. What the people that oppose this expect you to do is continue to stick your heads in the sand and do nothing. Continue to do nothing. And I'll close with Plato. The price good men pay for their indifference to politics is to be ruled by bad men. Thank you.
Oh, excuse me. Honorable Chair, Co-Chair, my name is Quincy Droik from Gladbrook, Tama County. I am in support of HJR 6. I come not to praise Caesar, but to bury him. Oh, excuse me, wrong speech. That's the next month. I come not to offer testimony pro or con for the use of Article 5 of our God-inspired Constitution. Rather, I come bearing references for your homework, like you're not busy enough already. I give you a statement of firm reliance on divine providence. As George Washington said, this is in God's hands. A list of the framers of the Constitution, so you will know them all. The call to the convention by the delegates of the Annapolis Convention in 1786, stating defects in our federal government and to take into consideration the situation of the United States to devise such further provisions as to appear to them necessary to render the Constitution of the federal government adequately for the exigencies of the Union. Copies of the 13 commissions by the states, the originals, one from the Continental Congress, reminding all that this was a convention of the states. A copy of the Articles of Confederation showing that Congress had no authority over state convention or its delegates. All these references attest to the jurisdiction of the states over their delegates, the lack of authority of Congress over the same delegates. and yielding to divine providence for the language chosen in the Constitution. Finally, previous applications from the Iowa legislatures for Article 5 conventions, all are still active but one. I urge this governing body to follow the courage and foresight of our founding fathers and previous Iowa legislatures to see this Article 5 application through. I humbly ask for your support on HJR 6. Thank you. Those are for y'all.
I'm Jim Walker. I'm from Colo. I'm here to speak in favor of HJR2. Does anyone here try to ever grow a garden? If you do, you know that if you neglect it, weeds will grow. And if you neglect it long enough, the weeds will take it over. Our Constitution is that garden. Our founders had just finished separating themselves from a totalitarian regime. They wanted the government to be as limited as possible. So they wrote Article 1, Section 8, which is the enumerated powers, 17 items that they considered to be essential for joining together the sovereign states. They started it, they bookended it. They started it with to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, comma, here's a list of things you're allowed to do. They ended that list with to make all laws which are necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. Foregoing powers referring to the list they had just provided. So our opponents will say, well, what's the point of adding new amendments if they don't obey it already? The thing is, they do obey it. They obey what the Supreme Court has told them they have to obey. There are three main cases that gave them the power that they currently use. McCulloch versus Maryland in 1819, the Fed decided that under the necessary and proper clause, they had the authority to open a national bank in Maryland. The court ruled against Maryland. This gave the federal government the authority to decide for themselves what was what was necessary. Then in 1937, Halbering versus Davis, the court ruled that Social Security was valid under the General Welfare Clause. This gave Congress the permission to decide for themselves what they thought was in the general welfare. Now, from this point, you can see our garden is starting to get a little bit messy. Then in 1942, Wickard v. Filburn, Roscoe Filburn was fined for growing 12 acres of wheat to feed his cows in violation of the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1938. He argued that the wheat was for his own personal use, not for the market. He lost. Instead of ruling the law unconstitutional, they determined that Filburn had violated it. Because he wasn't buying wheat to feed his livestock, he was in fact participating in commerce and therefore could be fined. This opened the floodgates for federal regulations. This is the plan for our garden. This is the state of our garden over 20 years ago. This is the 2002 edition. The current one is over 3,000 pages long. This is what our Supreme Court has given us in definition of this. It's time to go into that garden and start weeding some of the garbage out of it. Is it possible that things will be weeded that we don't intend? Maybe. But it's because of the high bar for passing amendments, it's more likely that we'll have to go back again and do some more cutting.
We got. All right, is there anything that hasn't been said? Okay, with that, I will let my colleagues have any comments that they want. And then, of course, I am in favor and will be signing off on it today. I believe paired with Representative Jones's bill, we've got a really good framework to continue this forward.
There are hundreds of thousands of Iowans who rely on Social Security. I would be a balanced budget amendment which makes Social Security insolvent. This is a line with Social Security trust fund.
Oh, 25. All right, thank you very much. Meeting is over.
Well, folks, you were just watching a three-person subcommittee hearing in Iowa, and they didn't do exactly what we expected them to do. We're expecting them to take testimony just on the 34 ready legislation first and then move into testimony on our actual Article 5 application, which is HJR 6 on the House side in Iowa. Instead, it looked like they just took testimony on HJR 6, the Article 5 application. I did not actually see or hear them vote, although we did hear the subcommittee chair, Shannon Lundgren, say that she is in favor and would be supporting that resolution, which we did expect. I think we have Catherine Zamanek, our regional director for Iowa. Catherine, did I miss something?
I think procedurally, it's a bit different in these subcommittees, Rita. I believe that the chair sort of made her motion, and we heard Representative Jones also say support.
Yeah.
The Democrat there voiced his opinion. He was a no vote, but it wasn't really a vote. It was hard to sort of decipher. So they'll move this on to the committee, the full committee in the state government.
It was just a little less formal than what we usually get, certainly for full committee, but even the Senate subcommittee was a little bit more formal than that. But you're right, we did hear and we did expect that the two Republicans on that three-person subcommittee, Representative Lundgren, the chair, and Representative Megan Jones, we knew they were both in support and heard them express support. Of course, the third member of that subcommittee, a Democrat, expressed concern about Social Security becoming insolvent if we were to pass a balanced budget amendment. Well, I'm not sure about that. I think it just means the federal government has to tighten its belt, which is already happening under the Trump administration. Our aim is to make those fiscal restraints permanent, and through our convention of states, we can do that through more than just a balanced budget amendment. We can also put permanent limitations on spending. For instance, limiting Congress to spending money for only those powers that are specifically enumerated in Article 1. That's one of my favorite ideas. Catherine, anything surprise you about that hearing today?
Well, we always have such good testimony in Iowa, and I'm always so proud of our grassroots that get up there. Karen Schuster just did an amazing job. I loved her 5-con. Let's take away that con label that we seem to get. We know it's meant to demean what we're doing, and let's take a positive spin. So I love that Karen said that. I think, Rita, what's going to happen now, my understanding is that they're just going to take a little break and they're going to come back for the 34 ready in the same subcommittee. Is that your understanding as well?
Well, it was actually scheduled for the 34 ready to hear that bill before they heard HJR 6. So they were supposed to hear the 34 ready bill at 1:45, the top of the hour. Obviously, they didn't do that. So my assumption would be that you would be correct and that they would be coming back in. So I don't know if producer G can go back to the hearing room and see if there's anything happening there yet. Obviously, Catherine, for our Article 5 application itself, the next step will be full committee in the Iowa House, and we're still waiting to be heard in the full committee or to be voted on in the full committee on the Senate side as well. So what's the Iowa team working on as we prepare for those full committee debate and votes to be scheduled?
Thanks for asking, Rita. Yeah, so we need all Iowans to be contacting the state government Senate committee right now to let them know that you're in support And now, of course, we'll be also doing a call to action to the state government committee on the House side in support. We have such tremendous champions in Iowa. I'm just very optimistic about where we go with this year. We just need to move a few legislators who still have questions, and questions are okay. As you know, we want to answer all questions. We want them to be confident in their vote, and we respect the fact that they're still thinking about this and they want to make sure that they have all the facts about it. So please, if you're an Iowan, contact those state government committee members, and that would be most helpful to us.
Catherine, were you surprised that there weren't any opponents testifying today? And I noticed too, I think there were some opponents when we were on the Senate side, but some of the big Iowa opponents like Tamara Scott weren't there this year. So what do you think about that?
Well, yay, I'm glad. I think if they're still opposing us, maybe they've decided they have a different strategy. They're working the ground, but we of course are also working the ground, and I think that we certainly invite Tamara Scott to join our side, be supportive of us, and our champions there. We have such great champions in both the House and the Senate. Representative John Wills, who's our sponsor there in the House, such a wonderful champion, and of course Senator Jason Schultz over in the Senate has always been a big supporter of ours. So maybe they're talking to them and maybe they've convinced them. What a wonderful piece of news that would be. And we've been just praying. We know that God's hand is also on this year. We saw it in Idaho yesterday, right? And so let's put some prayers out there for Iowa, that this is the year for Iowa to join the list of those states calling for the convention.
I sure hope so, Catherine. And I think maybe the opponents are just getting tired of having to come back year after year. Our grassroots, they might get tired, but they don't go away. They will not go away because they are in this fight for liberty for the long haul. And, it's so great to see. I'm so proud of them. I understand that we have Karen Schuster, who was there. She was the first one to testify. Karen's an assistant regional director with our national team, but also a native Iowan and has been in this fight for a long time. Karen, I loved your testimony. How did you think it went?
Thank you, Rita. Well, as Representative Lundgren said, we have been at the State House year after year. So pretty much sides are chosen, but we are working to get more on our side, just a few more votes. We're hoping this is the year. It could be the year. Much prayer we request from across the nation to get us over. I was just talking to Senator Schultz before I hopped on. He's the one that is sponsoring our resolution in the Senate side, because we've got a little work to do, but we're not afraid of doing work.
Well, that is obvious, and your hard work paid off just a little bit this morning, Karen, as you did get through that 3-person subcommittee. And are you expecting that subcommittee to go back in the next few minutes to talk about the Megan Jones 34 ready legislation? We were expecting them to talk about that first.
They actually talked about that at 7:45 Central Time. We got that done and wrapped up really quickly. It passed.
Oh.
That is a very thorough resolution, so there weren't any comments on that at all.
Okay, so we didn't get streaming of that, but you're saying it did pass. That's great. I'm really glad I asked, and really happy to see the success of that piece, because I know that was really important to Representative Jones, and she is a full-on champion for our application alongside the very excellent Representative John Wills, our House sponsor, and Senator Jason Schultz. Karen, anything else you want to say? What would you say to any Iowans who are watching right now?
Well, contact your representatives, contact your senators, let them know that you support this. They need to hear from you. That's what Senator Schultz was telling me, is that it's the constituents that are going to push us across the line this year. So please call them, write them, send them an email.
All right, Karen, congratulations on this victory. Catherine, congratulations to you. Thanks for being with us. And yeah, have a great day, everyone. Thanks for watching.
It's been a great week for Convention of States, Rita.
Amen.
Thanks, everyone.